Captain Zeth Cora of the Valdran Empire stood before the massive holographic display in the command center of Station Nexus Prime, the galaxy's most important trading hub. Her 6 eyes tracked the data streams flowing across the screen, each representing millions of credits in interstellar commerce. The Valdrans had controlled galactic trade for over 800 cycles, and Zeth Cora took pride in maintaining that dominance. "Captain," called her communications officer, Veltar. "We're receiving reports of unidentified vessels entering the Outer Rim territories." Zeth Cora's mandibles clicked with mild interest. Pirates and smugglers occasionally tested their luck in the lawless regions beyond civilized space. "How many ships? What class?" "That's the strange part, Captain. The reports are inconsistent. Some say dozens of ships, others claim hundreds. But the descriptions—" Veltar hesitated. "They don't match any known vessel designs in our databases." The captain's attention sharpened. In a galaxy where every spacefaring civilization had been cataloged and classified, unknown ship designs were impossible. The Galactic Council maintained detailed records of every species, every technology, every world capable of interstellar travel. Nothing escaped their notice. "Show me the sensor data," Zeth Cora ordered. The hologram flickered and changed, displaying a 3-dimensional map of the galaxy's outer rim. Red dots appeared scattered across several sectors, each representing an unidentified contact. The pattern seemed random at first, but as Zeth Cora studied it longer, she noticed something troubling. The contacts were positioned at key hyperspace junction points, locations that controlled major trade routes. "Have any of our patrol ships made contact?" she asked. Veltar's voice carried a note of unease. 3 patrol squadrons have gone silent after investigating these contacts. Their last transmissions mentioned encountering ships with unusual properties. Before Zeth Cora could respond, the station's proximity alarms began blaring. Emergency lights bathed the command center in pulsing red illumination. Through the massive transparasteel windows, she could see something that made her heart skip a beat. Ships were emerging from hyperspace all around the station. Not just a few ships, but dozens, then hundreds. The vessels were unlike anything in the galactic database. They were angular and aggressive, painted in dark colors that seemed to absorb light. Their hulls bristled with weapon arrays, and their engines glowed with an energy signature she had never seen before. "Shields up! All defensive systems online!" Zeth Cora shouted. "Send immediate distress calls to the Valdran fleet." The unknown ships moved with precision and coordination that spoke of advanced tactical doctrine. They surrounded the station in a perfect sphere, maintaining exact distances and angles that maximized their firepower coverage while minimizing friendly fire risks. It was a textbook military maneuver, executed with flawless discipline. "Captain," Veltar's voice cracked with fear. "They're broadcasting on all channels. The signal is incredibly strong, overriding our communication systems." "Put it through." The holographic display shifted to show a figure that sent chills down Zeth Cora's spine. The being appeared to be bipedal, standing roughly 2 meters tall. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, and its eyes were small but intensely focused. Most disturbing was its face, which held an expression of cold calculation that seemed entirely alien to galactic civilization. When the creature spoke, its voice was clear and measured, carrying an accent that sounded ancient, yet somehow familiar. "Citizens of the galaxy," the being began, "you do not know us, but we know you. We have watched from the shadows as you built your empires, as you expanded across the stars, as you divided our worlds among yourselves. You erased us from your histories, deleted us from your memories. Convinced yourselves we never existed, but we survived." Zeth Cora felt a chill of recognition she couldn't explain. Something about this creature triggered buried instincts, primal fears that had no logical basis. "We are humanity," the being continued. We are the species you condemned to extinction 3,000 cycles ago. We are the race you deemed too dangerous to exist alongside your peaceful civilizations. You succeeded in erasing us from the galaxy, but you failed to erase us entirely. The captain's mind raced. Humanity. The word meant nothing to her, held no place in galactic history, yet somehow hearing it spoken aloud filled her with inexplicable dread. For 3 millennia, we have prepared. We have built our fleets in the void between galaxies. We have developed technologies you cannot imagine. We have planned our return with the patience of a species that has learned to survive extinction. Today, that patience ends. Around the station, the human ships began powering weapons systems. Energy readings spiked beyond anything the station's sensors had ever recorded. These weren't just warships, Zethkora realized. They were weapons of annihilation, designed by a species that had 3,000 years to perfect the art of war. You will remember us, the human commander said, his voice carrying across every communication channel in the galaxy. You will remember why your ancestors feared us. You will remember why they chose extinction over coexistence. And you will understand that some species should not be erased from memory. The transmission ended, leaving the command center in stunned silence. Zethkora stared at the alien ships surrounding her station, trying to process the impossible. A species that had been extinct for 3,000 years had somehow returned with a fleet that dwarfed anything the galaxy had ever seen. "Captain," Veltar whispered, "the Galactic Council archives are responding to automated queries about humanity. The files they're corrupted, deliberately corrupted. It's as if someone spent centuries systematically removing every reference to this species." "That's impossible," Zethkora protested. "The archives are unhackable. They contain the complete history of galactic civilization." "Not complete," Veltar said, his voice hollow. "There are gaps, entire sectors of historical data that have been deliberately deleted or altered. Wars with unknown enemies. Planets that were sterilized for unexplained reasons. Colony ships that disappeared without trace. Captain, what if these humans are telling the truth?" Before she could answer, one of the human ships moved closer to the station. It was massive, easily 3 times the size of the largest Valdran dreadnought. Its hull was scarred with what looked like battle damage, but the wounds seemed old, ceremonial almost, as if the ship wore its scars with pride. "Nexus Prime, this is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Retribution Fleet," came a new voice, female but no less intimidating than the first. "You have exactly 1 standard hour to evacuate all non-essential personnel from this station. We are claiming it as our forward command base for the liberation of human space." "Liberation?" Zethkora found her voice. "This is sovereign Valdran territory. You have no legal claim here." The human admiral's laugh was cold and humorless. "Legal claim? You speak of laws written by the species that committed genocide against us, laws that declared our planets open for colonization after our extinction, laws that redistributed our resources among your empires. We recognize none of your laws." The massive human ship moved even closer, its weapon systems now clearly visible. The energy readings were off any known scale. A single blast from those cannons could vaporize the station entirely. "Admiral," Zethkora tried to keep her voice steady, "surely we can negotiate. The Galactic Council will want to discuss terms, establish diplomatic relations." "The time for diplomacy ended 3,000 years ago," Chen interrupted. "Your council had their chance to coexist with humanity. They chose extermination instead. Now we choose retribution." On the tactical display, more human ships were arriving by the minute. Not just around the station, but throughout the galaxy. Reports flooded in from every major world, every important system. The humans weren't just returning to one location. They were reclaiming everything. "Captain," another officer called out, We're receiving panicked transmissions from across the galaxy. The Astari homeworld is under siege. The Corvin mining colonies have gone dark. The Thek merchant fleets are reporting massive losses. This isn't just an attack on us. It's a coordinated assault on every major civilization. Zeth Kora watched as human ships took positions around strategic points throughout the galaxy. Their movements were too coordinated, too perfect. This wasn't just a military operation. It was the execution of a plan that had been developed over millennia. "How did they do this?" she whispered. "How does a supposedly extinct species coordinate a galaxy-wide offensive without anyone detecting their preparations?" "Captain," Veltar's voice was barely audible, "I'm detecting transmissions between the human ships. The encryption is incredibly advanced, but our computers are picking up fragments. They're using quantum entanglement communication, instantaneous, untraceable, impossible to intercept. They could have been planning this for centuries without anyone knowing." The scope of it was staggering. An entire species, supposedly wiped out, had spent 3,000 years preparing for this moment. They had developed technologies beyond current galactic understanding. They had built fleets in the empty space between galaxies. They had planned every detail of their return with the patience of the truly dedicated. "Admiral Chen," Zeth Kora tried once more. "What do you want? What are your demands?" "Demands?" The human's voice carried dark amusement. "You misunderstand our purpose here, Captain. We're not here to make demands. We're here to collect a debt of blood that has been accumulating interest for 3 millennia. Around the station, the human ships began forming into battle formations. Their movements were fluid and precise, showing a level of tactical coordination that spoke of extensive training and preparation. These weren't raiders or pirates. They were the military forces of a civilization that had spent 3,000 years perfecting the art of war. "You see, Captain," Admiral Chen continued, "when your ancestors erased us from the galaxy, they made a critical error. They assumed that extinction meant the end of accountability. They believed they could commit genocide and face no consequences because the victims would be gone forever." The implications hit Zeth Kora like a physical blow. If these humans were telling the truth, if they really were the survivors of a species the galaxy had tried to exterminate, then the current civilizations weren't just facing an invasion. They were facing judgment for crimes their ancestors had committed. "But extinction, as we have proven, is not always permanent," Chen said, "and accountability, even delayed by millennia, eventually comes due. Today, the galaxy will remember humanity. Today, the galaxy will understand the price of genocide." The countdown began appearing on screens throughout the station. 59 minutes and counting until the humans would take control. Around them, the dark ships waited with the patience of predators, their weapons trained on every vital system. Zeth Kora realized with growing horror that this wasn't just the beginning of a war. This was the beginning of a reckoning that was 3,000 years in the making. The galaxy had erased humanity from memory, but humanity had never forgotten the galaxy. And now, with fleets beyond imagination and technology beyond comprehension, they had returned to collect a debt written in blood and measured in extinction. The age of galactic peace was ending. The age of human retribution had begun. As evacuation alarms began sounding throughout the station, Zeth Kora couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. The galaxy had lived in ignorance for 3 millennia, building their civilizations on ground soaked with human blood. Now the ghosts were returning to reclaim what was stolen from them, and they brought with them the fury of the truly wronged. 3 hours after the humans claimed Nexus Prime, Chancellor Mordun of the Galactic Council stood before an emergency assembly that represented every major civilization in known space. The great chamber on Concord Prime buzzed with panicked voices, speaking dozens of languages, all asking the same questions. Who were these humans? How had they managed such a coordinated attack? And most importantly, what did they want? Order! Order! Morden's voice boomed through the translation systems. The massive Korthak's four arms gestured for silence as his species had done for centuries when leading council sessions. But never before had he faced a crisis like this. The holographic displays around the chamber showed the devastating scope of the human offensive. Red indicators marked conquered systems, stations under siege, and fleets destroyed or missing. In just 3 hours, these mysterious humans had crippled galactic commerce and taken control of 47 strategic positions. Fellow counselors, Mordoon began, his voice struggling to maintain its usual authority. We face an unprecedented situation. A species claiming to be extinct has launched what appears to be a coordinated campaign of conquest across known space. High Priestess Valthara of the Celestial Communion rose from her floating meditation platform. Her ethereal form shimmered with anxiety as she spoke. Chancellor, my order's historical records show no mention of any species called humanity. Our archives date back 15,000 years. How can an extinct species have no historical footprint? Minister Krex of the Sindari Trade Federation slammed his crystalline fist on the podium. Footprint? They have more than a footprint. They've destroyed half our shipping lanes. My merchants are reporting losses in the billions. Whatever these humans are, they know exactly where to hit us to cause maximum economic damage. That's what troubles me most, said General Thoktar of the Zerion military caste. His scarred hide bore the marks of countless battles, but his voice held a note of respect that surprised everyone. I've studied the tactical data from their attacks. Their strategy is flawless. They strike at communication hubs, supply lines, and command centers with surgical precision. This isn't random violence. This is warfare at its most sophisticated. Mordun nodded grimly. Which brings us to the disturbing claims they made during their broadcast. They speak of genocide, of being erased from galactic memory. If there's any truth to these accusations... Impossible, interrupted Scholar Velnas of the Academic Collective. The idea that our predecessors could coordinate such a massive cover-up across hundreds of species is absurd. You're talking about altering the historical records of every civilization in the galaxy. And yet, said Minister Krex, his voice thoughtful despite his earlier outburst, my people have been conducting emergency audits of our oldest archives. We've found irregularities, gaps in our historical data that we never noticed before, trade records that reference unknown partners, military reports mentioning conflicts with unnamed enemies. The chamber fell silent. Each representative was clearly thinking about their own civilization's records, wondering what gaps might exist in their histories. High Priestess Valthara's form flickered with distress. I must confess something disturbing. Our most sacred texts, the Foundation Chronicles that describe the early ages of galactic civilization, contain several passages that have always puzzled our scholars. They speak of the Great Purification and the necessary removal, but we always interpreted these as metaphorical references to spiritual enlightenment. What if they weren't metaphorical? General Thoktar asked quietly. What if they were literal descriptions of historical events? Before anyone could answer, alarms began blaring throughout the chamber. Emergency communication channels activated, carrying panicked reports from across the galaxy. Chancellor! The voice of Fleet Admiral Zekthos crackled through the speakers. The humans have made their next move. They're not just occupying strategic positions anymore. They're digging. Digging? Morden's confusion was evident. Excavation operations, Chancellor, on dozens of worlds throughout the galaxy. They seem to know exactly where to dig, as if they're following some kind of map. But here's the strangest part. Every site they've chosen is officially listed as uninhabitable wasteland in our databases. Dead worlds with no strategic value. Minister Krex leaned forward. What are they finding? That's just it, Admiral Zekthos replied. Our long-range sensors can't penetrate their excavation sites. They've deployed some kind of interference field, but preliminary scans suggest they're uncovering structures, massive structures buried beneath centuries of sediment. The implications hit the assembly like a physical blow. If the humans were excavating what appeared to be ancient cities on worlds officially classified as barren, it suggested that these planets had once been inhabited. By whom? And why was there no record of previous civilizations on these worlds? General Thoktar stood slowly, his massive frame casting shadows across the chamber. Counselors, I believe we need to face a terrible possibility. What if these humans are telling the truth? What if our ancestors did commit genocide on a scale so massive that entire worlds were sterilized and their histories erased? The logistics would be impossible, Scholar Velnus protested. To coordinate such an action across hundreds of species, to maintain secrecy for 3,000 years. Unless it wasn't a secret, interrupted High Priestess Valthara. Her form had grown brighter. A sign of deep spiritual disturbance among her people. Unless it was so widely accepted, so universally justified that no one felt the need to hide it. Perhaps the real question isn't how such a conspiracy could be maintained, but why such a consensus existed in the first place. Morden felt his foreheart sinking. You're suggesting that humanity was considered such a threat that every major civilization agreed to their extinction. And to erasing all evidence of their existence, Valthara added, which would explain the systematic gaps in our historical records. It wasn't a cover-up. It was a deliberate attempt to ensure that future generations would never know what we had done. The chamber erupted in heated debate. Some representatives refused to believe such a conspiracy was possible. Others argued that the evidence was becoming overwhelming. All of them were terrified by the implications. Through it all, reports continued flooding in about human activities across the galaxy. Their excavations were revealing massive underground installations. Their fleets were growing larger as more ships arrived from unknown locations. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to know the galaxy better than its current inhabitants did. Chancellor, Admiral Zekthos's voice cut through the debate. I'm receiving a transmission from the human fleet. They're requesting immediate council representation for negotiations. Negotiations? Mordoun felt a spark of hope. They're willing to discuss terms? I'm not sure, Chancellor. The human admiral specifically requested that the negotiations take place at coordinates she provided. Our navigation computers identify the location as empty space in the Kepler void. Empty space? Minister Krex was puzzled. Why would they want to meet in the middle of nowhere? Admiral, Mordoun said, transmit our acceptance. A delegation will depart immediately. Chancellor, Admiral Zekthos's voice carried a note of warning. There's something else. The human admiral said to bring representatives from all the guilty parties. When I asked for clarification, she said we would understand when we arrived. 2 hours later, a council diplomatic ship approached the coordinates in the Kepler void. Chancellor Mordoun led a delegation that included representatives from every major civilization. As their ship emerged from hyperspace, what they saw left them speechless. The Kepler void wasn't empty. Hidden in the shadow of a dark nebula was a structure so massive that it defied comprehension. It appeared to be a space station, but its size rivaled that of a small moon. The architecture was unlike anything in current galactic civilization, yet somehow familiar. By the ancient stars, whispered High Priestess Valthara, how long has this been here? According to our sensors, the ship's captain reported, the structure shows signs of continuous habitation for approximately 3,000 years. Smaller ships guided the diplomatic vessel toward a docking bay that could have held a dozen vessels their size. As they docked, the delegation was met by humans in formal diplomatic attire. Their leader was a woman who appeared middle-aged by human standards, with gray-streaked hair and eyes that held the weight of centuries. "Welcome to Memorial Station," she said in perfect galactic standard. "I am Secretary General Elizabeth Harper, current head of the Terran Provisional Government. We have much to discuss." She led them through corridors lined with what appeared to be memorial plaques. Thousands upon thousands of names were etched into the walls, along with symbols and text in a writing system that predated any current galactic language. "Every name represents a human world," Harper explained as they walked. "Every plaque marks a colony that was destroyed in what your ancestors called the Cleansing Campaign. 3,000 years ago, humanity was spread across 417 worlds throughout this galaxy. By the end of the campaign, all but 12 had been sterilized." Minister Krex stopped walking. 12 worlds survived?" "Barely," Harper replied. "Hidden worlds, forgotten outposts, research stations that escaped notice. We spent the first 1,000 years simply trying to survive. The next 1,000 rebuilding our population and technology, the final 1,000 preparing for this day." They entered a vast chamber dominated by a holographic display of the galaxy. Red dots marked hundreds of locations, each representing what Harper called a memorial site. Former human worlds now listed as uninhabitable in galactic databases. "Your excavation operations," General Thoktar said with growing understanding. "You're uncovering evidence of your former colonies." "Evidence that your ancestors tried very hard to erase," Harper confirmed. "Cities buried under artificial landslides. Orbital installations detonated and crashed into planetary surfaces. Entire populations sterilized with bioweapons designed to eliminate human DNA while leaving the worlds eventually habitable for other species." The delegation stood in stunned silence as the scope of the historical atrocity became clear. This wasn't just genocide. It was systematic erasure on a scale that boggled the mind. "Why?" Morden finally asked. "What could humanity have done to justify such extreme measures?" Harper's smile was cold. "Justify? Your ancestors believed that humanity was too aggressive, too expansionist, too successful at warfare to be allowed to exist alongside peaceful civilizations. We had a saying back then, humanity. Fiat, yeah. It was an expression of pride in our species' ability to overcome any challenge, to never give up, to fight against impossible odds, and somehow find a way to win. Your ancestors found this disturbing," she continued. "They saw our success in warfare, our refusal to accept defeat, our tendency to unite against common threats regardless of our internal differences. And they became convinced that eventually humanity would conquer the entire galaxy." High Priestess Valthera's form flickered with realization. "The prophecies in our ancient texts, the warnings about the endless warriors and the Unity Forge, they were about humanity." "Your seers were remarkably accurate," Harper confirmed. "They predicted that humans would eventually unite all of galactic civilization under a single banner, bringing an end to the diverse, fragmented political structure your species preferred. So they decided extinction was preferable to unity," General Thoktar said grimly. "They convinced themselves it was self-defense," Harper replied. "The historical records we've recovered from your own archives tell an interesting story. The campaign against humanity was presented as a preemptive strike against an inevitable threat. Your ancestors genuinely believed they were saving galactic civilization." Minister Krex found his voice. "What do you want from us now? Reparations? Territory? Revenge?" Harper gestured toward the memorial displays surrounding them. "We want what was taken from us. We want our worlds back. We want recognition of what was done to us. And we want assurance that it will never happen again. The current galactic population on those worlds numbers in the hundreds of billions," Morden protested. "You can't just displace entire civilizations." "Can't we?" Harper's voice held no mercy. "Your ancestors displaced our entire species. They erased us from existence without considering the moral implications. Why should we show more consideration than they did? The chamber fell silent, except for the soft humming of the memorial displays. Each representative was calculating the impossible mathematics of the situation. If the humans reclaimed all their former worlds, it would displace populations across hundreds of systems. The economic and political disruption would collapse galactic civilization. But if they refused, they faced war with a species that had spent 3,000 years preparing for exactly this scenario. A species that had already demonstrated technological superiority and strategic brilliance beyond anything the current galaxy could match. "There is a third option," Harper said, reading their expressions. "Your ancestors chose extermination because they couldn't imagine coexistence, but we've had 3,000 years to consider alternatives. We're prepared to offer you a choice they never gave us." "What choice?" Mordun asked. "Integration," Harper replied. "Not conquest, not extermination. Unity under human leadership with full protection for all species and cultures. The very thing your ancestors feared, offered as salvation instead of punishment." The delegation exchanged glances. It was a choice between impossible options: war against a superior force, displacement of trillions of beings, or voluntary submission to human authority. "Think carefully," Harper warned. "We've demonstrated our capability for warfare. Our next demonstration will show our capacity for mercy. Choose wisely. The galaxy won't get a third chance to coexist with humanity." As the delegation was escorted back to their ship, each representative understood that they were returning to their civilizations with the weight of history on their shoulders. The age of galactic independence was ending. The age of human leadership was about to begin. The only question was whether that transition would be peaceful or written in blood. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been running for 18 hours straight. Representatives from across the galaxy argued, pleaded, and calculated while their civilizations waited for a decision that would reshape the future of known space. Chancellor Morden looked across the chamber at faces that reflected fear, anger, and desperate hope in equal measure. "The choice is impossible," declared Ambassador Velthok of the Rimward Coalition. "Submit to human authority or face extermination. How is this any different from what our ancestors allegedly did to them?" General Thoktar stood slowly, his battle-scarred form commanding attention. "Because they offered us a choice our ancestors never gave them. Because their demonstration of power came with an offer of mercy." "Mercy?" Minister Krex's crystalline features glowed with anger. "They've crippled our trade networks, seized our strategic positions, and threatened to displace billions of our citizens. You call this mercy?" "I call it restraint," Thoktar replied firmly. "Look at their capabilities. Their technology is centuries ahead of ours. Their fleets outnumber ours 10 to 1. Their strategic positioning is perfect. If they wanted to simply destroy us, they could have done so already." High Priestess Valthera's ethereal form pulsed with contemplation. "My meditations have shown me visions of what could be. The humans speak truth when they say they could have chosen revenge. The fact that they offer integration instead suggests a wisdom earned through suffering." "Wisdom or manipulation?" challenged Scholar Velnas. "How do we know this isn't simply a more sophisticated form of conquest?" The debate was interrupted by the arrival of Admiral Zekthos, who entered the chamber with urgent news written across his features. "Counselors, the humans have begun their second demonstration. You need to see this immediately." The main display activated, showing real-time footage from across the galaxy. But instead of destruction, the scenes showed something unprecedented. Human ships were arriving at worlds suffering from natural disasters, industrial accidents, and pandemic outbreaks. They weren't attacking, they were helping. "The mining disaster on Kepler 7, Admiral Zekthos reported. Human rescue ships arrived within hours and deployed technologies we didn't know existed. They've already saved 3,000 trapped miners and are working to prevent environmental collapse. The plague outbreak on Vega Colony, he continued. Human medical ships are distributing treatments that our doctors say shouldn't be possible. The infection rate has dropped by 60% in 12 hours. The drought on Centauri Prime. Human atmospheric processors are generating rainfall across the entire continent. Agricultural yields are already improving. Minister Krex stared at the displays in wonder. How are they doing this? Even if they had advance warning, the logistics of coordinating relief efforts across dozens of worlds. They've been monitoring us, General Thoktar realized. For how long, I don't know, but they've been watching galactic civilization and preparing to help with problems they knew would occur. Or problems they caused, suggested Ambassador Velthok suspiciously. Admiral Zekthos shook his head. Negative. Our forensic teams have confirmed that the disasters are natural or accidental. The humans couldn't have caused them without leaving traces our investigators would detect. High Priestess Valthara moved closer to the display, studying the rescue operations with growing amazement. Look at how they work. Mixed crews, including members of species they claim to be seeking justice against. Coordinated efforts that respect local customs and authorities. This isn't conquest disguised as charity. This is genuine compassion in action. The chamber fell quiet, as representatives absorbed the implications. The humans had demonstrated their capacity for warfare with their initial strikes. Now they were demonstrating their capacity for mercy and cooperation. The message was clear. They could be either enemies or allies, depending on the galaxy's choice. Chancellor, Admiral Zekthos continued, I'm receiving another transmission from Secretary General Harper. She's requesting permission to address the Council directly. Morden nodded grimly. Put her through. The holographic display shifted to show Harper standing in what appeared to be the command center of a massive space station. Behind her, humans and aliens worked side by side at control stations, coordinating the relief efforts visible on secondary screens. Counselors, Harper began, her voice carrying across the chamber with calm authority. By now you've seen what we call our mercy demonstration. We wanted you to understand that our return to the galaxy doesn't have to mean endless war and suffering. Secretary General, Mordoun addressed her formally, your relief efforts are impressive, but they don't change the fundamental nature of your ultimatum. Don't they? Harper asked. Counselors, your ancestors feared human unity because they believed it would lead to galactic conquest. They were both right and wrong. Right that humanity would eventually unite the galaxy. Wrong about what that unity would look like. The display shifted to show historical footage, apparently recovered from ancient human archives. It depicted human colonies from 3,000 years ago, diverse, vibrant worlds where humans lived alongside dozens of alien species. Before the cleansing campaign, Harper explained, humanity was already demonstrating the unity your ancestors feared, but not through conquest, through cooperation. Our worlds were melting pots of galactic civilization. We solved problems together, celebrated achievements together, faced challenges together. Your ancestors saw this and panicked, she continued. They assumed that human leadership would mean human domination. They couldn't imagine a form of unity that preserved diversity, that strengthened differences instead of erasing them. Minister Krex leaned forward. And you believe you can achieve this impossible unity? We've had 3,000 years to figure out how, Harper replied. 3,000 years to study your civilizations, to understand your cultures, to develop systems of governance that could work for everyone. The display showed detailed plans for galactic administration. Not human empire building, but carefully designed power-sharing arrangements that preserved local autonomy while providing centralized coordination for major challenges. Consider the problems your current system can't solve, Harper said. Interstellar crime operates across jurisdictions that won't cooperate with each other. Environmental disasters affect multiple worlds, but no one coordinates response efforts. Trade disputes escalate into wars because there's no trusted arbitration system. General Thoktar studied the proposed administrative structures with professional interest. These frameworks, they're actually quite elegant. Centralized, strategic planning with distributed implementation, unity of purpose without uniformity of method. Exactly, Harper confirmed. Human leadership doesn't mean human control. It means human responsibility. We take on the burden of making the hard decisions, of coordinating between conflicting interests, of ensuring that the galaxy's diverse civilizations can work together effectively. Scholar Velnus raised an objection. But why should humanity bear this burden? What gives you the authority to lead? Harper's expression grew somber. Because we've paid the price for galactic leadership in advance. 3,000 years of exile, the deaths of billions of our people, the destruction of our civilization. We've earned the right to leadership through suffering your ancestors inflicted upon us. More than that, she continued, we've learned from that suffering. We understand what happens when fear drives decision-making. We know the cost of choosing extermination over cooperation. We won't make the same mistakes your ancestors made. High Priestess Valthera's form brightened with sudden understanding. The ancient prophecies spoke of leaders forged in fire, tempered by loss, strengthened by exile. They spoke of a people who would unite the galaxy not through conquest, but through wisdom born of pain. Your seers saw truly, Harper acknowledged. Humanity has been forged by 3 millennia of exile into something our ancestors could never have become. We are no longer the aggressive expansionists your predecessors feared. We are survivors who learned that true strength comes from lifting others up, not tearing them down. Ambassador Velthok wasn't convinced. Fine words, Secretary General, but if we refuse your offer, you'll resort to force. How does that demonstrate your supposed evolution? Harper's response was measured and calm. If you refuse, we'll take what was stolen from us. Our worlds, our resources, our rightful place in galactic civilization. But we won't repeat the sins of the past. We won't commit genocide. We won't erase your histories. We'll simply reclaim what's ours and build something better on the foundation of what was lost. You're talking about displacing trillions of beings, Minister Krex protested. Your ancestors displaced an entire species, Harper countered. The difference is that we're offering relocation, not extermination. New worlds, new opportunities, compensation for the disruption. It won't be easy, but it won't be genocide. The chamber buzzed with quiet conversations as representatives conferred with their advisors. The choice was becoming clearer, but no easier. Submit to human authority and risk losing independence, or resist and face displacement and conflict. Counselors, Harper said, drawing their attention again, I want to share something with you, something that might help you understand what we're truly offering. The display showed a view of space near Memorial Station. As the delegation watched, more ships began arriving. But these weren't warships. They were massive construction vessels, orbital habitats, and colony ships. These are the Ark fleets, Harper explained. For 3,000 years we've been building not just weapons of war, but tools of creation. We've designed new worlds, developed revolutionary technologies, created systems for making inhospitable planets into gardens. The scale was staggering. Hundreds of massive ships, each capable of supporting millions of beings, mobile cities, floating gardens, orbital rings that could provide living space for entire civilizations. We're offering to share all of this, Harper said. The worlds we reclaim will be improved, not just restored. The civilizations that join us will gain access to technologies that could solve problems you can't even imagine yet. General Thoktar stood slowly, his decision made. The Zerion military caste accepts human leadership. Our warriors have faced impossible odds before. We recognize strength when we see it, and wisdom when it's offered. High Priestess Valthara followed. The celestial communion joins with humanity. The visions are clear. This is the path to a greater future for all galactic civilization. One by one, representatives stood and declared their civilization's acceptance. Not all were enthusiastic, but even the reluctant ones recognized the futility of resistance against such overwhelming force combined with such generous terms. Minister Krex was among the last to stand. The Sindari Trade Federation accepts, but we want detailed economic protections written into any treaty. Of course, Harper agreed. Every civilization's concerns will be addressed in the integration protocols. Finally, only Chancellor Morden remained seated. As the senior representative of the Galactic Council, his decision would be symbolic as much as practical. Secretary General Harper, he said slowly, 3,000 years ago, the galaxy made a choice based on fear. Today, you ask us to make a choice based on hope. It's not an easy transition for species that have grown accustomed to independence. Independence is an illusion, Harper replied gently. Every species in the galaxy depends on others for trade, for resources, for protection. All we're offering is honest acknowledgement of that interdependence, with systems designed to make it work better. Morden stood finally, his forearms spread in the traditional gesture of acceptance. The Galactic Council hereby recognizes human authority over galactic affairs. May the ancestors forgive us if we're wrong, and bless us if we're right. Harper smiled for the first time since the negotiations began. Chancellor, I think your ancestors would be proud. You've chosen growth over stagnation, hope over fear, unity over division. The galaxy will be stronger for this decision. In the weeks that followed, the transformation of galactic civilization began. Human administrators worked with local leaders to design integration protocols that preserved cultural identities while improving efficiency. Human technologies were shared freely, solving problems that had plagued various worlds for centuries. The reclamation of human worlds proceeded slowly and carefully. Existing populations were relocated to improved colonies or given the option to remain and work alongside returning human settlers. Some resistance movements formed, but they found little support among populations that were seeing tangible improvements in their daily lives. On Memorial Station, Elizabeth Harper stood before the wall of names representing lost human worlds. Soon, many of those names would represent living worlds again. The dead would be remembered, but the living would build something better on the foundation of their sacrifice. Behind her, humans and aliens worked together in the command center that was becoming the heart of galactic administration. The unity that had terrified ancient civilizations was becoming the salvation of their descendants. Secretary General Harper touched one name on the memorial wall, her own homeworld, destroyed 3,000 years ago when she was just a child. Tomorrow, she would stand on that world again as construction teams prepared it for new settlements. The age of human exile was ending, the age of galactic unity was beginning, and this time, that unity would be built on understanding rather than fear, cooperation rather than conquest. Humanity had returned not as conquerors, but as leaders who had learned that true strength comes from lifting others up. The galaxy would never forget the lesson of what happened when fear chose extinction over cooperation. This time, hope would choose life.